Hello. My name is Laura Rathbone, and I'm a specialist physiotherapist. And I work in the field of persistent pain, which means I tend to work with people who are experiencing um, ongoing pain, which is very difficult for us to make sense of through the biomedical model, alongside usually quite significant psychological distress or mental health complaints. So I'm really excited to be able to do this workshop and interested to see where it goes. I'm recording this at home. So essentially I'm speaking to nobody right now, which is quite a strange experience. So do forgive me for that. But I wanted to share with you my understanding of acceptance and commitment therapy and how we can best use this to support the people that we work with. So yeah, that's why we've called this Act in the World, because we are humans and people existing within a much bigger environment than just the clinical room or the particular moment of pain. And as this is only an hour, or I think just over an hour, we'll see how we do with time. It's really just the dipping of the toe. It's the tip of the somewhat overused metaphor of the iceberg. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of interest and excitement into exploring more about this psychological construct and way of viewing the world. So yeah, I suppose a little bit about me. I studied my undergraduate at a very small university in the northwest of England in a place called Preston, and we were a problem-based learning degree, so I learned an awful lot about questioning and getting comfortable with questioning the status quo and why we do things. I did my master's. Oh, hello, Florence. This is our little Florence. I did my master's at King's College, where I had the enormous pleasure and honour of being able to study pain under the now Professor Mick Thacker. And before I became a physiotherapist, I trained to be a journalist at the University of Liverpool John Moores in Liverpool. So I did that before I became a physio. So I've always really been interested in communication and how people talk and how people function within their world. At the moment, I am hosting a podcast called Philosophers Chatting with Clinicians. What we're doing there is we are bringing together a clinician and a philosopher to try to bridge the gap between the two approaches to human experience. And I also co-host Le Pub Scientifique with my colleague Bart van Buchem here in Amsterdam, and of course that's part of the much bigger Le Pub Scientifique group with Tim Beams and Steph Polton in London. So a little bit about me. Oh. I wanted to show you some of my some of the people that have inspired me and influenced me over the years. So of course we've got Louis Gifford there up in the top left, and of course Mick Thacker. We've got Antonio Benedetti and Damasio there, who are also very influential in thinking about how we experience the phenomena of placebo, as well as the world and consciousness and philosophy of mind. And Lorimer Moseley, of course, is up there. Ted Kapchuk, and the classics, Pat Wall and Ron Melzack, probably discussing their neuromatrix model for pain on the bench there outside of MIT, and Lance McCracken down in the bottom right, which is where I got most of my training for acceptance and commitment therapy whilst working for him at the Input Pain Management Centre in London, which was a sort of a 4-week program where we worked every day with people who were experiencing quite profound pain and suffering. So let's move on. We only have a short amount of time, so what I have tried to do in this introduction is to try to give you the main concepts of acceptance and commitment therapy, the main processes, and what it is that, you know, how we label things. And then what I really want to do is to give you a kind of a feeling for what ACT might be like for you. And then to have a bit of an exploration as to what we think ACT might be doing, so that we can stimulate some conversation for the question and answer session, which will be run in a couple of weeks from now. So what I think might be quite helpful to have is a piece of paper or post-it note, something that you can write on, and a pen, so something that you can write with. And hopefully we can get to these exercises as we move. So if you need to go and grab those things, maybe hit pause now, and then off you pop. And then when you come back, we'll carry on. Okay, so why should we as physiotherapists have psychology skills? Well, the reality of the problem is that pain is not just a physical experience. And if we look at the global burden of disease, whilst low back pain is up there as one of the main complaints for people within society, we're also almost always dealing with feelings of depression and anxiety alongside it, as well as clinically diagnosable depression and anxiety, which are two different things. There's a huge crossover in our patient group, and I think we're doing our patients a disservice if we are suggesting to people that they need to fix their depression before they can work on their pain, or they need to fix their anxiety before they can work on their pain. Essentially, we need to get better and more comfortable at working with people who are also experiencing high levels of emotional and psychological distress, like depression and anxiety. That doesn't mean that we are the clinicians that will treat that, but it means that we have to be more equipped at managing the symptoms of these conditions, these problems, as they arise in our clinical encounters. And so I think it's also ethical for us to be able to confidently and comfortably use some psychological strategies to help the people that we work with who are in pain. Because otherwise what happens is we end up pinging patients back and forth between services, because, you know, psychologists don't feel skilled to deal with pain, because often they feel like it's a kind of a physical experience, and likewise physiotherapists and other clinicians are as guilty of doing the same in reverse, so pinging patients over to the sort of psychological departments because they don't feel comfortable with the symptoms of depression as they arise in the moment. So I think there is a real pragmatic need for us when we work with pain to be skilled in this area. But before we move into the, as I like to call it, the easy question of pain, which we might not be able to explore that much today, I would like you to take a moment and to really think about what it means to live well. So I'm going to suggest that you pause the video here and write down on your piece of paper what you would define health as being. You know, what does it mean to you to be able to live well? So maybe press pause and have a little think about that. But essentially, I really want you to make sure you've written something down. you're going to probably find that very difficult. And there's going to be a strong urge to not do that, especially because this is a recorded webinar. So it's possible for you not to do this. But to go along with the spirit of this, I really want to encourage you to write something down. Okay, so we have some definitions of health. Probably the most some of the more classic ones, or the one that certainly has been hanging around for a long time, is this idea that it's an absence of disease. It's incredibly vague, means very little. But there's a lot of assumptions built into this old definition of health. First of all, that there is a state of being that is absence from disease, which means that potentially there is a perfect way of being, and that really has come about over a really complex and rich evolution of healthcare, I think. And we can probably bring that all the way back to good old Descartes. Poor Descartes gets pulled out. This young lad's been burnt by this fire every pain lecture. But essentially what happened here is Descartes pulled the sort of the soul down and like out from the body and put it into a separate being, almost put it up into heaven. So before that, the church owned the soul, and the soul was within the body, which meant that it wasn't possible for us to do any anatomical or physiological investigation of bodies, because we weren't it was sinful to damage the soul of the human. So Descartes, essentially what he was able to do was to separate that and to say that the church can still own the soul, but the body that is the kind of puppet of the soul is the non-thinking, the non-conscious aspect of what it is to be human. And what happened was health became very concerned with this physical, measurable, tangible idea of what the body was. And that led us down the garden path of thinking that there is a kind of a desirable anatomy, a desirable way of being, a physical being within the world, and any sort of deviation away from that was both measurable but also pathological, or the potential for pathology lay within that deviation. And so to be healthy for a very long time meant to be kind of perfect, meant to be kind of there is this sort of this fantasy based human that is elevated, that we're all aspiring to be, because we're trying to be this healthy, happy person within our world. And that can be seen as a sort of historical journey from pain being delivered to us as a punishment by the church, by God, to pain being something that we experienced as a result of ill health, this deviation from perfection, which meant that we became very, very concerned with correcting that deviation, so making that more perfect in order to have this absence of disease. And I think we can hear that story quite loudly in the biomedical model, and definitely in the way that we are trained at undergraduate as physiotherapists, I think. But we are moving on, and things have started to change. And in 2011, the definition of health was updated again to be the ability to adapt and to self-manage in the face of social, physical, and emotional challenges. It's just a lovely definition. And no longer is it about trying to obtain this sort of disease-free, symptom-free life, but it's about recognizing that maybe there is no perfect, and maybe it's about how we function within our world that defines how healthy we are. And that's certainly some of the feedback that we get from people who are living with long-term conditions, that it's the long-term condition, although it is incredibly challenging and difficult to live with, it's made so much harder to live with because there are so many other aspects of their role within society that they also have to lose, or they are they're being, yeah, they're losing as a result of the setup of our social structure and economic structure. So these are really interesting developments in how we understand people and how we understand health. So where does ACT come into this? Well, I suppose it fits very nicely with this idea, this more modern idea of health, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to alleviate the suffering and the struggle that comes with a particular problem, like pain, depression, anxiety, addiction, whilst also providing that very, very practical and applicable framework for behaviour change that we've been sort of evolving and developing through the first wave CBT approaches. But bringing them more in line with a person's values. And that's really what defines a third wave approach to CBT, that it is bringing in this the idea of compassion and values-based approaches to managing the impact of a symptom as opposed to targeting the specific symptom itself. So that means that we have to make quite a big commitment to the people we work with. What we need to be comfortable with saying is that, you know, we need to be very comfortable with avoiding the judgment of a person's behaviour. So and also encouraging a person to avoid judging their own behaviour. It's moving away from this idea of right and wrong. You know, ill health is not just a deviation from perfection. So, you know, there is no right way and therefore there is no wrong way. There is only what works for you as a human being, what works for you as a person. And we have to use the person's own recognition of what that is. So what is helpful or unhelpful behaviour? What is working for you? And then allow them to make a choice to live by either. And that's really the hard bit for many of us clinicians, because we have a very strong righting reflex, this idea that we can see the unhelpful patterns of behaviour because we're observers and afforded that kind of luxury. And then we somehow want to correct it in the other person. And we need to make a commitment to the people we're working with to say, well, if you are an adult, you're a human, you are in control of your own behaviors and your own choices and your own decisions. And if we go through this process and you consider this and value this behavior to be part of your life, even though we're recognizing that it might be unhelpful, it's not my role to change that. That doesn't sit with me. That sits with the person who is allowed to make choices about how they live their life. So that's really tricky. So we're going to get a little bit more into that later on, but that's why when we come to look at ACT, we shouldn't really be looking at ACT as something we do to patients. It's very much something that we are a huge fundamental part of. So, you know, this old Stoic idea from Epictetus, this idea that we don't explain our philosophy, we embody it. So we don't ACT is a kind of philosophical approach to applied psychology and applied philosophy in a way. So it's not enough for us to think that we should just explain what ACT is and then teach somebody else how to do it. We have to embody it and model it. And this makes up a big part of the ACT training, the sort of extended ACT training. It's about how do we as clinicians recognize our role within it, within the therapeutic process and the therapeutic relationship, and how do we be more aware of that and be more skilled at recognizing when it's helpful and unhelpful to the process itself. So, ACT in a nutshell. There are basically two goals within ACT. We want to accept that there are unwanted private experiences and that they're present in everybody, in every human, including therapists as well as the people that we work with. And then make a committed action towards living a valued life. A valued life, can I just caveat here, as being determined by the person who is in pain or whatever the particular symptom is that they're coming through, the primary complaint is. Okay, this might not work. Oh yeah. Okay, so here I am. This obviously Christmas had not arrived in our house when I recorded this. Don't know if you can see our Christmas tree, but it's very very fancy. Okay, so this is me, and essentially I'm going to try and explain ACT here. So if we think about an uncomfortable experience like pain. Okay, so what I want you to do is hold, and you can do this at home. So hold up a file to your face and hold it as close to your face so that it's the only thing that you can see. You can't see anything else around it. Okay. And as you're holding this up to your face, I want you to think about or notice perhaps how much of the room you're able to see through the file, how much of me are you able to engage with as you're doing this. And notice the quality of your experience now, having this file up in front of your face. You know, notice what's starting to happen in your experience. Notice if you've already put it down. Notice if you didn't even take it up, right? So if you've already put it down, what you're doing there is you're relieving the discomfort of having this thing in front of your face blocking your view. Okay, it's quite hard to have an experience in the world, so it's very close to us. Okay, and that relieving mechanism is quite common. It's so fast and so profound, we don't even notice it. We immediately want to get rid of it. But I want you to just experience how hard it is to be part of this conversation whilst your file is up in front of your face. Okay, so now I want you to think about, okay, so you've got the file up in front of your face and it's a problem and you want to get rid of it. So the temptation is to push it as far away as you can. You're really going to struggle trying to push it. You're trying to see around it. You're trying to get rid. You're really desperately trying to get rid of it. And notice how that feels for you. How does it feel to be holding this out as far away from you as you can? And how you know, how what's happening in your physical body? Is that it's starting to get heavy? It's starting to get uncomfortable. Maybe you're really wanting to put it down. Your mind is probably coming in with all sorts of stories that, you know, this is a recorded webinar, you don't have to do this. Oh, I'm just going to put this down, I'm just going to relieve this. And I want you to try not to relieve it. Try to stay with it. Keep pushing it away, pushing it away. Okay, and now I want you to, you know, think that I was telling you perhaps an interesting story, or trying to tell you some science of pain, particularly maybe trying to teach you how to live a new life, but keep pushing this thing out, keep pushing this thing away. How easy is it for you to maybe concentrate on what I'm saying here? And how easy is it for you to get the quality of experience? So with ACT, what we're trying to do is we're just trying to bring that file into your heart. So bring it close towards you, bring it deep, really close into your heart now. Maybe, you know, drop it underneath you, really embrace that, give it a cuddle. What we're trying to do here with ACT is we're trying to say that the struggle of pushing something away can often be the problem. So with ACT, what we're trying to do is we're trying to embrace an experience, embrace a difficult experience, bring it deep within you, so that you can have the experience you can have the experience of the world alongside the uncomfortable and somewhat difficult or traditionally labelled negative experience. So that's a tricky thing, isn't it? That's a tricky thing to try and explore. Because what we're not trying to say here is resign to the fact that you have this thing, this pain, or whatever is the primary symptom. What we're trying to say is, let's accept that this is just where we are. So rather than trying to push it away, which is a version of non-acceptance, we're going to accept that here, this experience is part of the way we are within the world right now. And maybe through a kind of allowing approach, we're also able to free up space within our sort of lived being to allow us to experience other parts of the world, which may bring us more joy, or may bring us more excitement, or I don't know, imagination, creativity. and rather than getting caught up in the struggle of trying to avoid an experience or not have an experience. So the official definition, much more eloquently put than perhaps my old ramblings. So the goal of ACT is to increase psychological flexibility. That's a term that we still don't fully understand, which is the ability to contact the present moment and the psychological reactions that it produces as a fully conscious human being based on the situation to persist with or change behaviour for valued ends. So it's a complicated definition. Probably one of the biggest turn-offs from ACT is that it's just full of jargon. And that's because it's based very, very, very closely on pragmatism and contextualism, these sort of applied philosophical models to being and living within the world. Okay, but there is the hexaflex. So this is a sort of infographic that's trying to visually model what are the processes and targeted principles within acceptance and commitment therapy. So right in the middle is psychological flexibility, and all lines are pointing inwards and across. It's like a kind of complex matrix of processes that's trying not to be linear, because this is not a linear process. It's an emerging process. It's an emerging transition that's happening within the human across many aspects of their cognitive and behavioral self. So we're always trying to improve a person's flexibility within a kind of an experience, a lived experience. So we'll go into that a bit more as we come through it. So let's start at the top. So contact with the present moment. This is the conscious awareness of your experience in the present moment and enables you to perceive accurately what is happening. I think there's a huge assumption in there about what is an accurate perception, but there's always problems with the models. It gives you important information about whether to change or persist in behavior. And this is it, in a way, so this is really fundamental to ACT, that behavior is, if we can create some space between the thoughts and the emotions and the perceptions and the desires and the compulsions and the invasive compulsive behaviors, then maybe we can create space to sort of make a choice as to how we react, what is the behavior. And this is this idea of being able to catch yourself. So you're catching when you're fused to a particular thought or emotion that has coupled a behavior to it. So you're just going to catch the behavior before it actually happens, and therefore allowing you to engage fully in what you are doing, as opposed to what you have done or what you are worried might happen, might want to do. Okay, acceptance. So within the process of acceptance, we're trying to encourage this kind of active contact with the sort of psychological experiences, this sort of direct and open contact without having to push it away. And this is where we're coming back to this idea of embracing what is within our present moment without trying to change it. So it's a diffused, open, undefended contact with the present moment as a fully conscious human being. Of course, it's a sort of an act in, we're wanting to do something that is possible and not possible to various states, depending upon the situation and depending upon where you are as a person. But it's the idea of noticing that these things are all there and we're not necessarily trying to push them away. So we're being open to our experience as it is, without necessarily getting caught up in the struggle of the judgments and the sort of the thoughts that might come with that. Diffusion. So this is not only being able to observe your thoughts, but it's being able to recognize that thoughts are are in themselves not necessarily fact. So because you've thought it doesn't make it the truth. It's just the truth as it is in your experience right now. So and that those thoughts and emotions and memories and worries can be very, very strongly coupled with a behavior, but that we are able to separate those. And so it's this idea that rather than being, that we are able to sort of think of ourselves as being able to act outside of our thoughts and urges. So we're being able to find space. This is the strongest metaphor, I think, within ACT, is this idea of finding space, holding space, sitting in the moment between having the thought and having and doing the action that's often coupled. So it's often thought of as this idea, okay, so within the first person, I am having the thought that I want to run away, and then the action might be coupled with that very, very, very strongly. And then it might be that we take a step away and we're like, oh, I am noticing that I am having the thought that I want to run away. And even in that step of diffusion, there is a kind of separation from it. And then maybe that allows us to say, oh, well, if I'm having the thought that I want to run away, maybe I can also have the exploration of, do I really want to run away? Is that something that I value? And that's where we come into the next processes. So values, this is about life direction. What is it that we want to life? What is the choice that we make about our life, the life we choose? So I am having the thought that I want to run away. I am noticing I'm having the thought that I want to run away. And now I am having an exploration as to whether is that behavior helpful for me in maintaining my value or living a life within my value, which might be to be more socially connected. So let's say you're experiencing social anxiety and it's Christmas, you want to spend Christmas with your family, but there's going to be a lot of people there, and being in a small room with many people might be very difficult for you, but it might also have a very strong value for you. So not doing that brings you into conflict with your values, but doing it puts you into a situation where you're experiencing quite strong, overwhelming discomfort. So we would say, as the person is, so if the person has decided to take a step towards the action and they're going to go, they would be using mindfulness and present contact with the present moment to accept the fact that there are uncomfortable experiences within that, and that there may be a strong urge to run away from that, and then using diffusion to make a choice to stay with their value, if that makes sense. So they're going to use the diffusion to say, I'm having the thought to run away, but I am choosing to stay with my goal. And I'm going to use present contact awareness and acceptance in order to stay here for a given time, or until the point where they feel they don't want to, or they may stay there for as long as they're enjoying it. And they may be able to find that there is also joy. So they may use contact moment in order to find, yes, okay, there is this strong discomfort of being here, which may be in the form of shortness of breath. It may be that they feel the noise is very loud, or that they can't concentrate on what people are saying, but there may also be the joy of living in line with their values. And what we're trying to do is to help the person commit to that particular value and to bring out that particular present moment experience, to attend to that present moment experience of joy that is coupled with that value, as opposed to getting caught up in the struggle that comes with the present moment experience of discomfort that is coupled with the behavior of avoidance or moving away or leaving. And that's how we would use values. So you need to really know what someone's values are before you start thinking about creating therapeutic programs or goals or therapeutic behavioral experiments. So using real-time experiments to explore these things. And the only way you're ever going to really know what the person's values are to ask them. So a huge part of your assessment process needs to be getting to know the person in front of you, what makes them tick, what are their passions before they had pain, perhaps. What was their life like, or if that was a very long time ago, or if they have never in their living memory not had pain, which is, it can often be the case. We have to try to find a way of developing an idea as to what might they want to do, and it becomes very difficult then. But this is where the committed action comes in. So we find the strong value and then we make that commitment, and it is a chosen behavior in the service of value. So this is the skill bit. This is the thing that we're trying to build up as well within people, is this okay, I'm now going to commit to my choice. I'm going to make an action-based decision that is in line with the values that we have talked about, and we're going to use all of the skills within the rest of the Hexaflex in order to do that. And by doing that, we're building a version of psychological flexibility. It's this idea of being able to move with discomfort and uncomfortable situations, but to stay grounded with your value-based goal or action. So this is it's a highly complex model for behavior change. What we often see is that people often use one particular side of the Hexaflex, which would be the sort of mindfulness and acceptance aspect. So it's as opposed to really getting stuck in the values and the committed action part of the Hexaflex. And I think that's partly because they're the more pragmatic sides of it. It's the more sort of you can dive right into those things quite quickly, whereas getting to learn a person in front of you requires time and helping to support them through making like these sort of behavior choices in the service of their values that can sometimes take time. And maybe that's a problem within our healthcare model, that we don't feel like we have the time to do that. But finally, number 6, self as a context. Without a doubt, this is the hardest bit to try and explain, but it's probably the juiciest bit. This is the bit where we're really thinking about the truth of the person. We're really trying to get them to recognize that the way they move around their life is based upon their experiences and their choices, and that they are able to take an observing position within that when that is helpful and when that's not helpful. So it is possible for us to come up into this observing position where we're like, okay, so I'm frightened of spiders. I have a phobia of spiders, but spiders are very important to me. I'm not sure why I would say that, but maybe we do. Maybe it's really valid. Maybe you want to move to Australia or something, and you realize that spiders are venomous or something, and you need to learn about them, but you've been so phobic of spiders that you haven't even been able to learn about them, and you're not able to embrace them, so you're not able to move to this part of the world. I'm not sure, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. So it might be that in order to live with that goal, that action, we have to take this observing self. So when I am phobic of spiders, this is what happens. So I make the decision to avoid all things to do with it, and oh, look how I'm doing that. Maybe if I don't avoid it, maybe I can move towards it. And it's trying to see your behavior and your thoughts and the whole sort of spectrum and richness of your cognitive and behavioral experience of the world, to try and see that as something that you can watch. And if you can take a step back and watch it, then maybe we can problem solve more helpful strategies for managing it. So easy peasy, right? But it's a very difficult one for us to measure. It's the thing that we think acceptance and commitment therapy, I think because we don't measure it, it's probably the thing that is the most important, but it's that we don't have a full understanding or awareness of what's going on. There's something within that our language doesn't quite cover. So yeah, so this is the hexaflex, and it has been called sort of hexaflex dancing when you're developing a session or a clinical interaction, that you're sort of dancing around these processes with the person you're working with, or your patient, your client, in order to in service of trying to move towards a more psychologically flexible place. So allowing them to decide or to choose a particular behavior, not a particular emotion or thought, because they're probably going to come anyway, or a symptom because they're probably going to come anyway, but this is about really being flexible within that experience in service of a valued action or a valued goal, or a life that you choose. Okay. So often what gets used is this metaphor of passengers on a bus. It's the idea that thoughts, feelings, experiences show up for us, and can create a sort of a very loud experience of discomfort. So if we imagine that we're the bus driver on this particular bus, and every single person wants to get off at a different place, but you have a designated stop. So as you're moving along, it might be that lots of these passengers start shouting for you to change your course, or to stop, or to do something different. And I suppose your job as the bus driver, and what we're saying here is our job as the driver of our bus trying to reach our destination, is to choose which passengers we listen to, as opposed to getting caught up in listening to all of them. And it may be that in the situation of the bus driver, they need to get to their designated stop, and so actually the best idea is for them to recognize that all those passengers are there, or, because they're part of the experience, but yet to take steps to keep going to their designated stop. Because if you keep stopping, you're never going to make it to where you want to go. So often when we're using acceptance and commitment therapy, we might talk about these things as passengers jumping on board. So pain might be a passenger, fear might be a passenger, worry might be a passenger, but also there might be a passenger of joy, or there might be a passenger of excitement, or passion, or contentment, or something might be thrilling, but it may well be that they are less attended to by us than the other passengers. So essentially it's about sort of being aware of these experiences that jump on board, and then being able to navigate our way to our final destination. Should we choose to? Should we continue to choose to? And that's where we really need to make sure we're working towards a valued end that is powerful enough to the person that it's going to keep them moving forwards. They're going to keep wanting to sort of move towards that goal. So the key points, often what we're dealing with is this idea of cognitive fusion. So it's this fused behavior and thoughts and emotions, where there's no space between the doing of the behavior and the having the thought. So I'm having the thought that I want to run away, or I want to stop, and then I'm doing the behavior of stopping, and there's no wiggle room within that. And then there is this, the next problem is this idea of experiential avoidance. So we are avoiding difficult stuff. So we're pushing difficult stuff away from us all the time, and getting, and the energy and the sort of focus of, and the struggle of pushing things away means that we're not doing the things that are important to us. We can be incredibly fused to past and future experiences. So the idea that when things have gone wrong before, that means that they're always going to go wrong. And so we will fuse to that passenger, for example. Or we might be very caught up in what could happen, what might happen in it, either what might happen with if we do this particular action, or what might be the result of doing that action. And then we can get very, and that might also lead to this sort of experiential avoidance, this avoiding doing valued action. There's this idea also, another problem within that we try to focus on with ACT is this idea of a fixed self. So I am an angry person, as opposed to I am a person that can be angry. And it may work, so we start to intertwine and weave our identity into things that we experience often, and that might be experiences like emotions, or it might be experiences like pain. So I am an angry person, or I am a person in pain, may start to become a huge part of our conceptualized self. And what we're wanting to do is perhaps start to shift this as saying, well, yes, you are a person who has context and content, but those things do not define you, and they're not fixed. So we're trying to dip the toe into being a sort of experimental with the concept of the self as well. Then there's this conflict between what we're doing and what we want to do, this conflict between our actual behavior and our value. So living outside of our values, outside of our goals, can bring us incredible distress. And then if we try to avoid the distress, we're getting even further away from the actual action that we want to do, the valued goal, the valued work that we want to do. And that can lead to this, sometimes lead to this thing called behavioral disactivation. So no action, which is in itself an unhelpful action. So the strategies that we're trying to work on is the idea that control is the struggle. So trying to control something, control your pain, control your thoughts, control your anxiety, creates a bigger struggle. So because not only are you having the symptom, but you're then having the problem of trying to control the symptom. Another strategy that we're trying to weave into our sessions is that willingness is an alternative. Being willing to change, being willing to do something else is an alternative to this idea of control. There's a strategy around creative hopelessness as opposed to learned hopelessness. This is something that people often misunderstand ACT to mean resignation versus acceptance. So resignation is very much around this idea of learned hopelessness. There's nothing I can do about it. Nothing I do changes things. There is nowhere to go from that. That's very unworkable. What we're trying to create is and foster is an environment of sometimes creative hopelessness, as difficult as that might sound to us as clinicians. This idea that, okay, but right now we don't necessarily have an ability to change the symptom, but what can we do within this present moment that may bring us closer to something that we value, something that you value? What might you be able to do right now, even if it's 1% of the 100% goal? What can we do right now? And that might mean that we have to be quite creative to our therapeutic environment. So the room that we do things in, the sort of equipment that is available. And it may well lead the person to be quite creative about their strategy and solution to that question. The next one, the values lead to action. So it's this idea that our values pull us towards action. So we have to find a value strong enough, that has a strong enough pull, that will bring us towards action. If we're working on something that's important and meaningful, the action should flow from it. Although it will come with discomfort and difficulty and struggle, the action will come from the value. So if you haven't got your value right, if you're working towards a goal that the patient simply doesn't value, you will struggle every step of the way, because the symptom and the discomfort will outweigh the potential benefit of the value. And then this other idea of the observing self. So using your mindfulness and your diffusion strategies to try to allow the person to create space between having the thought and the emotion and the symptom and the sensation and the behavior and action that might be very strongly coupled with it. So these are the things we're trying to work into it. One of the things that we often do is a technique called anchoring. So I'm going to invite you to do an anchoring experience. So if you're sitting comfortably, I'm going to invite you now to close your eyes and take a moment to notice your breath. There's not really any need to change your breath, although the urge might be there. That's okay. That's what we do as humans. But in this moment, I'm going to give you permission to allow your breath to simply be what it is. It's okay to notice if that's short or deep, fast or slow, but neither of those things are wrong. None of those things need to be changed. It's okay for your breath to just be what it is. You may well notice that there are thoughts coming in, stories coming in about what you have to do later, what you were trying to remember, judgments about what we've just talked about. That's okay, that's what our minds do. They're always thinking, always bringing up experiences. But right here, right now, all you need to focus on is your breath. All you need to do is breathe. It's okay to notice that those thoughts are coming in, but I would invite you to bring yourself back to the experience of your breath, allowing those thoughts to carry on without you needing to spend too much attention on them. Perhaps noticing that in this present moment, the only thing that is really pressing is the need to breathe. The rest of the world will just carry on. All we're doing here is breathing and sitting. And you may notice that there are other things present here. You may notice that there is the sensation of the chair, the feeling of being sat in a room, the noises around you. It's okay, those things can be here and we can notice them. But all the time, bringing our attention to our breath. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. This is an exercise called anchoring. That was the breath anchor. But we can anchor to anything. It could be a sound or a particular sensation or a feeling or a position. Some people like to use the feeling of their feet on the floor and to try to explore what that feels like for them. But it's often described as a bit like a ship in the sea. So if you imagine you've a very stormy seas and your boats are out in the port, and all we're doing is dropping an anchor. We're not trying to change the storm. We're not trying to take away the uncomfortable experiences of the moment. We're just dropping anchor so that we can be with those experiences, but be safe within them, or have a feeling of safety within them. So that's one metaphor. Being in Holland, it rains a lot. So I prefer the idea of it being a bit of a crap bus shelter. So it's a bit of a rubbish bus shelter in torrential rain, although I think this picture might actually be from England. We're not necessarily taking the rain away. We're not even really warmer, but perhaps in that moment, we're able to find some kind of a way, some experience, some helpful experience that allows us to stay there without too much struggle. It allows us to drop the struggle. That's what we're trying to do with an anchoring. Just a moment where we can recognize that there's a lot happening here right now, and that we need to create a bit of space. We need to anchor down, find a place of safety, find a way of being here in the moment, so that we can start to create the space for the observing self, for the present contact, for the diffusion to take place, so that we can make these committed actions, these choices towards our values. So when we're working with people who are bringing up lots of experience of distress, it can be really useful to keep using this anchoring skill. Okay, let's say we're doing a particular experience, like one of the goals is to be able to walk up and down the stairs because they want to be able to get on a metro which doesn't have a staircase, but it doesn't have an elevator perhaps, and in some parts of London that's definitely true. So and in other parts of the world it's perhaps more true than it is in the more developed parts of the Western world. So if we're working on staircase, then it might be that you get to the bottom of the stairs and all of a sudden the person is starting to be very overwhelmed and already starting to experience avoidance. So they're already wanting to get away from this. Before we even get there, we might just be exposing them to the concept of a staircase with this anchoring technique so that they can create space within, between the sort of the thought of a staircase and the behavior of avoidance. So we're trying to create this breathing space in a way in between those two things. So we're trying to find a rubbish bus shelter in the torrential negative experience or uncomfortable experience of avoidance that leads to avoidance. So this is really where mindfulness has emerged as a real growing process within acceptance and commitment therapy. And obviously there are third wave CBT approaches that are specifically focused around mindfulness-based approaches. But with ACT, we're using mindfulness as a form, as a technique. And the sort of official definition is that it's a diffused, accepting, open contact with the present moment and private events as it contains as a conscious human being, experientially distinct from the content being noticed. So what that means is that the present moment and the private events are essentially two different things, and between them there is space. So we've got the present moment of being at the base of a staircase and wanting to work on something that has perhaps had and wanting to work on the staircase. So there's the stimulus of the staircase, the actual object, the shape of it, the color of it, the size of it, the room that surrounds it. There's the present event, the present moment, that also contains these private events, private conscious events, like memories and the affective side of our private consciousness, like emotions, thoughts, perhaps that every time it's gone wrong in the past, or worrying about what this might mean if you go up the stairs for your pain in the future, which might be in the next few minutes. So all those things are present. Okay, so if you've got your sweet or your cookie, I've got in Holland at the moment it's Sinterklaas, so I'm eating a pepernoten covered in dark chocolate. So I want you to just take it and put it in your hand. Okay, and just first of all notice what urge comes around it. So what is the overriding experience you're having? Perhaps take a look at it. So thinking about what it looks like. What's the present moment sort of stimulus? What is it to have this sweet or piece of orange or chocolate in your hand? And what shape is it? What colour is it? Just noticing all the bits about it, perhaps in a way that you've never noticed it before. Roll it around in your hand, really feel the texture of it. Look at it, if you've got a piece of orange, what are those strange veiny bits on it, or if it's a piece of chocolate, or perhaps have a smell of it. See if you can smell it. What does that smell like? Noticing if there are any thoughts or urges that come with it. A thought might be, oh, that smells delicious. So you're having the sensation of smell coupled very closely with the perception of what that smell means, the meaning behind that smell. Okay. And coupled with that might be a strong urge to eat it, or maybe not, now that you've got to know it a bit more. What's the overwhelming action that is afforded to you? What is given to you by the stimulus, the action given to you by the stimulus? And rolling it around, smelling it, keep going with it. Okay. And now, of course, you can eat it if you want to or not, but I want you to notice all the things that came up with there. So within that moment of just holding this sweet, we were able to get a real experience that there is there's a stimulus, and then there is the sensation of seeing it, touching it, feeling it, smelling it. And then there is, coupled with that, there is the perceptual aspect of it, which comes with the desire to eat it, the extent to how we attend to it. So whilst we're attending to this sweet, were you also really noticing my voice? Were you noticing the chair you were sitting on? Were you noticing the world around you? Or had you become very attentive of this particular focus point? And also perhaps noticing that by embracing it, by looking at it, maybe the urge to eat it somehow changed. Maybe it became more so, but yet you still didn't do it. So you were having an increase in a sort of a symptom, the symptom of hunger, the symptom of wanting to eat it, the desire, that sort of experience, but then not doing it, in which case you were recognizing that your action and your private emotions and thoughts and compulsions are separate to your actions. Or what might have happened, which is in some cases what happens, is people then don't want to eat it. So actually the initial urge to eat it became more dampened as you experienced it and as you explored it. So embracing the full sort of spectrum of what it is to hold a sweet can sometimes change the urge and the compulsive behavior around it. And I think this is really what we're trying to work on when we're thinking about act and behavior. So that strong compulsion to avoid something can sometimes be dampened as we go more into the thing we're trying to avoid, but it can also sometimes be it can get bigger, but then we would use the skills around committed action and staying with our values in order to be with that discomfort. So that leads us to the important question: how is mindfulness like a tin of baked beans? Well, the idea here is that if you imagine you have a cupboard full of tins and none of them are labeled, you're having this lots of experiences that you need to get involved in, you need to open up and have a look at in order to be able to say what they are. But if we are able to label things, so we label, okay, oh look, there's the experience of holding a sweet. Oh, I'm holding a sweet, therefore it's round, it's sticky. We can label that. That is a physical sensation. Okay, and then we might get the experience of wanting to eat it. Oh, there's the desire to eat. Oh, look, I don't need to get into that tin of what it is to be desired. I don't need to struggle with that desire. I can just label it. There's the desire to eat it. There is the smell of the chocolate. There is the memory of every Christmas I've eaten these particular sweets. And the feeling that comes with that memory, the emotion that comes with that memory. We can start labeling them as opposed to getting involved in them. So with mindfulness, what we're trying to do is to build the skill of labeling the private events that are happening as part of a present moment. And in that way, trying to create space between the private event and the unhelpful action that might be coupled with it. So that's basically, that was ACT. So now you know what you're doing. We start thinking about why we're doing it. Although I do know that we've run over significantly, so Jared and Mark might be editing this down. I'm not sure what will happen. So ACT is difficult because there is limited evidence to suggest that it is better than any other particular psychological approach to the management of pain. Particularly, what we see is that there is emerging evidence that it fares better at improving some of our targeted outcomes, so the things that we measure, like pain acceptance, and some of the non-targeted outcomes like depression. So it might be that using ACT is helping some of these other aspects of the pain experience that are coming alongside it, but we don't seem to be making the kind of changes that sustainable change anyway that we would like to within ACT. So after 4 weeks, after 6 months, we see some change in the reporting of pain, but often we're starting to see those reports returning to the original levels. Yeah, but what we're hoping is that we're working within the lived experience of having pain as opposed to the pain itself. So perhaps there is some indication coming through that ACT has a slightly better adherence. So people seem to be able to adhere to the concepts and the processes of ACT for longer than others. But again, I would be really, really wary of making any black and white claims at this stage. ACT is quite new. Our evidence is quite new, certainly not as big as the CBT evidence base. But what we're not seeing is that it's worse. So we're not seeing worse outcomes. So there's no ethical, at this stage, I think there isn't a sort of thing to say that we shouldn't be using ACT, which I think is a good step for us. But really, when we're working with ACT, we're really, especially for pain, we're really trying to explore and separate this idea of sensation, perception, and experience. So if we're thinking about pain as a sensation or a symptom as a sensation, so let's say we're really struggling with the original idea that this Kantian idea that sensations are measurable, and not only are they measurable, but the magnitude of the stimuli has a relationship to the magnitude of the sensation. So with pain specifically, we have really good evidence that the magnitude of the stimuli does not necessarily have this causative relationship to pain, to the pain that is experienced by the person. So there is a kind of stimulus, there is a sensation of pain, there's a stimulus leading to a biological cascade within the sensory system that leads to this sensory transduction, which may or may not be associated with a greater experience from the sort of perceptual and affective aspects that can create this label of pain. So pain is a phenomenon, it's a felt phenomenon within the human body, that it has both a sensory aspect but also is dynamically coupled and woven with this sort of embodied and emerging experience of the human. So what we're getting with this sensation is we are getting this specific activation of the sensory pathways, and the rest, as they say, is history. But really it is, because we're starting to move into the concept of perception. So yes, our sensory systems are experiencing things like a staircase. So we might have the stimulus might be of a staircase, but the perception and the inferring and enacting our felt and lived body within the world can be very powerful. So essentially, perception is the kind of the added stuff that complex biological systems do, because this is about sense making. And when I was writing this, I was like, oh, sense making, that's a really interesting term, something I haven't thought about much before as a why do we use that terminology. But it's, if we're taking essentially here the activation of a sensory pathway, which may be visual, or it may be touch based, could be light touch, heavy touch, could be nociceptive, could be thermal, could be chemical. These sensory activation, sensational activations, and then we're turning them into a lived experience. We're literally making the sense of them. So the sensation itself, these transductions within our sensory pathways, have no real meaning at all. They're just biological principles that happen, but they happen within the embedded human, within the embodied human. And it's the human that has the experience that comes with it, this phenomenological experience that comes with the activation of our sense organs. So it's the perceptions and the thoughts and the memories that are coupled with the activation of our lived body, our sensing body, that is involved in the magnitude of what we're doing. And so Kant has sort of said that stimuli is the appearance of a possible experience. The stimulus and the sense organs are allowing the experience the possibility of coming forward in the human, but it's the human that brings it forward. And so the problem with pain is when a particular experience, particularly when it comes to persistent or recurring experiences of pain, might arise when the possibility for the experience of pain becomes coupled with stimuli that wouldn't typically evoke a sensation of pain. So this is perhaps where we need to start moving our understanding and incorporating our understanding and exploration of embodied cognition, or what I think the last talk was with Peter Stilwell on his sort of 4E cognition modeling. So it's this idea that we're dealing with change. We are dealing with an adaptive and evolving lived body that has sensory apparatus that is reacting to stimuli within the world around them, but that the meaning of that and the human experience of those lived stimuli is very much coupled with their life as a person on this earth, and the things that they've been through and the experiences that they've had. So why might ACT be helpful here? Because we're trying to alleviate the suffering and struggle that comes with a particular problem like pain, as opposed to trying to change the pain. So although we're hoping that might happen with time. So we're building on this 4E model, this idea that we're working with embodied, embedded, and active and extended humans. And to borrow from my friend Julian Kiverstein, we would also add ecological, because we're within a world that makes sense to us, and that our sensory systems and our perceptions and the objects in our world all around us are dynamically coupled at bringing forward our experience. So ACT is specifically trying to work on that relationship rather than the emerging experience itself. So, you know, I called this talk Dipping a Toe because you are, you know, I'm hoping that you have had this opportunity to dip your toe into ACT, but what we're also trying to do with our patients is to help them dip their toe into their experiences around us, around them, sorry, so that we can start working on the sort of the interactions of how their sensory systems feed into their perceptual systems, and how that might be bringing forward an experience of pain or suffering or struggle. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to take steps towards discomfort, towards the things we're avoiding, because it's in the stuff that we're avoiding that all of our behavior change needs to happen. So to come back to a classic, you know, we really need to move back away from this idea of the sort of biopsychosocial model being this sort of these three elements that we're trying to work with, this sort of biological bit, psychological bit, and social bit, because what we're seeing now as physiotherapists is that we need to have skill sets that transcend those boundaries. It's not enough for us to move a person around this model. We have to fully embody the biopsychosocial model in a way, and recognize that we are working with a patient that is part of a hierarchy of systems that are meaningful to them. So if we look at the old model by Engel, which is by far the best, but it's a bit more complicated, you know, all of the arrows are moving between each other. You know, we've got a person in the middle of it, but we've also got the sort of the person that they're having the interaction with, so the clinician, but then you've also got the family, their community, their culture, their subculture, the society. These are all feeding into that person's experience and behavior. But beneath that, you also have all of the biological cascades and mechanisms that are also working in order to underpin their experiences and the way they behave and are within the world. So ACT, we're not trying to tackle the problem or the symptom. So when we're using ACT for pain, we're not trying to find mechanisms to reduce the pain. We're not using mindfulness to reduce the pain. We're not using it as a relaxation tool. We're not using present moment awareness to reduce the pain. We're not creating goals for healthy actions to reduce the pain. We're working on the sort of the systems of hierarchy that may be affected by the pain, that may be feeding this unhelpful relationship, this unhelpful behaviors that are part of the suffering that comes with pain. And in that way, we are looking at how the person is existing in the world. We're dealing with the being bit of humanity. And so we need to take a humanistic approach that is all encompassing in order to do that. And for me, acceptance and commitment therapy is one way that we might do that. So ACT is uncomfortable for both the therapist and the person with whom we are working, because we're dealing with life experience of that person, which emerges through their interaction with their world. Therefore, we have to be able to manage our own discomfort in order to stay with that person as they walk the path through their own uncertainty. And that is the end of my talk. So thank you very much for staying with me. It's fast and we've covered a lot, and I'm really looking forward to the questions that you might come up with and the session that we will do in a couple of weeks. If in the meantime you want to get in touch with me, or you feel like you have a comment that you just can't keep to yourself, like you want to explore something, please do connect with me on Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, and you know, if you just want to send me an email, that's also fine. But I just want to say a huge thank you. This is a long bit of work, and I know it can feel heavy. Yeah, so good luck, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Bye. Oh, and Merry Christmas. Bye.